So first of all, thank you. I'm extremely pleased to be here. Thank you to Paolo for organizing this interesting conference. And after so many sound, balanced, and biased views about merger analysis, I just say that my view is merely pragmatic, very much sensitive to time constraints, data availability, spending review, and to the economic background of judges. So we have to take into consideration all these ingredients beyond other economic ingredients. So my presentation is much less ambitious than the previous presentations, and it just provides a brief review of the relatively recent experience of the Italian Competition Authority in the use of the price pressure analysis. I mean, it also risks to be less tasteful than the previous presentation, as the example I chose concerns canned meat. And it seems to me a quite clear-cut and useful example, but believe me, it is not, let's say, a tasteful market. So, and finally, I have to add that after Chris' slides on economic models and London Underground, my task is even more difficult. So the content of the presentation are those illustrated in this slide. I mean, a brief review of how the new tools, the relatively new tools in merger analysis are increasingly being used by the Italian Competition Authority. In the recent months, just 2 mergers in the last 12 months have been assessed also on the basis on methods other than market shares, Findel and so forth. Afterwards, a brief review of the Simmenthal Manzotin case, the canned meat case, and I mean, just some considerations about our experiences so far with the new tools, and some, just some open issues. Let's say, okay. So first of all, the new tools are not so new, at least even for the Italian Competition Authority, because I mean, we started to apply them since 2004. I was envious about the 10 years Chris reviewed in his presentation, something like that in Brussels. So I tried to find something older than the recent examples. And I mean, with a, let's say, a small effort, I succeeded in doing that, because there was a merger in 2004, a conditional clearance concerning the financial markets, where price pressure analysis played a quite important role for the decision, and structural elements were not self-evident because market shares were slightly higher than 40%, and even though, I mean, the relatively new tools helped in a different decision. Numiko Mellin concerning the baby milk market in 2005, again another conditional clearance. It was a case of collective dominance. Again, I remind for the non-Italian experts that, I mean, we still don't have a proper, let's say, European test with a substantial lessening of competition, but we are still linked to the dominance test. So we have to play with collective dominance even in a very creative way. So in that case, it was a clear-cut case of collective dominance, and again, price pressure analysis in that case was quite important for assessing competitive constraints in baby food markets, not only in the baby milk, but I mean in the remaining baby food markets. Again, another case where formally the new tools have been used was Alitalia Volare in 2006, and another conditional clearance, and diversion ratios played a significant role in considering the airport of Linate as a distinct and relevant market from Malpensa and the other airports in the western north, let's say close to Milan. But I have also to add that in other cases, price pressure analysis played an important role, let's say in back office assessment in phase 1. For instance, when we when the Italian Competition Authority decided a full clearance of mergers in the glue markets or in the dairy markets, because in those cases, market shares were quite high, but even though in phase one, just applying in a very fast way, just using in a very fast way UPP or some of the other indicators, I mean, the decision was quite different. Or in phase two, in the assessment of the remedies, again, in a case concerning the milk industry. So, I mean, there is a relatively old story. But in the, in the most recent period, we'd say with the last 12 months, quite a number of mergers were assessed in phase two, and it is quite strange. Although the thresholds have been changed, I mean, it's although possibly also because, I mean, a quite high number of cases were assessed in phase two, a relatively quite number for the Italian experience. I mean, 5 in the last year. So one concerning the gas distribution, and it was a prohibition, and 2 concerning consumer goods, one the canned meat, the other the canned tuna, so Bolton Alimentari, Simmenthal, the canned meat, and it was a conditional clearance. Bolton, Luis Calvo Sanz concerning canned tuna, and it was a full clearance in phase 2. The other one concerned maritime transport, a quite problematic and, let's say, politically sensitive merger concerning the privatization of the state-owned company Tirrenia, and finally an attempt by the Italian Alitalia, CAI, to buy Windjet, which was again a conditional clearance. In 2 cases, as I said before, the 2 concerning the consumer goods, so the canned meat and the canned tuna, price pressure analysis was used. In Bolton Alimentari, the new tools were used only in phase 2, and I'll explain why. And whereas in the other case, the one concerning the canned tuna, the diversion ratios were used also as a screening device in phase 1. Both the merger concerned consumer goods industry, and I stress this one because it's quite relevant for the availability, or at least for the prompt availability of data. I mean, let's keep, rapidly in trying to illustrate some of the distinctive features of the most clear cut of the 2 cases, the Simmenthal-Manzotin case. The parties are quite well known. The first one was the Kraft Group. It's a multinational and owner of the Simmenthal brand, which is the leading brand for canned meat in Italy. There is an old tradition which origined after the Second World War, because the US Army imported this specific kind of canned meat. And from that period onward, Simmenthal remained the brand which is a sort of identified market. So for an Italian, Simmenthal means canned meat. So it's a very strong brand. And Bolton, the other part of the merger, is the most important producers of branded canned food and owner of the best-known brands concerning other canned foods. Manzotin is again in the canned meat market, whereas Rio Mare, Alco, Palmera are quite famous brands, at least at the national level, concerning canned tuna. The merger adds yet another brand, Simmenthal, to Bolton's portfolio. Just for your curiosity, these are the guilty ones, and this is the red one is the Simmenthal, is the most famous brand. But rapidly skipping to the economic analysis, just starting from the tradition, market shares. In this case, market shares were quite self-evident. You can see that the post-merger market shares, whatever you calculate them, are quite high, 70, 80, 90. So, in this particular case, market shares were considered sufficient to go to phase one. So again, the so-called the slogan used by Chris, market definition is dead, I mean, in that case proved that it was not dead. I'm seriously tempted to joke about that because, I mean, once we were used to say that even Marx was dead, you know, when Woody Allen, Marx was dead, somebody has a cold, something like that. But, I mean, the economic crisis, I mean, is proving that Marx is not that dead, and here there is somewhere Leslie Marx that is perfectly alive. So, I mean, before saying that somebody is dead, you have to be quite cautious. But I mean, trying to be serious again, high market shares do not necessarily mean that the merging parties may be able to increase prices post-merger, and this may be especially the case if products are differentiated. I mean, everybody has said before me and better than me that, I mean, all these indicators or all these indexes are perfectly fit for differentiated products. An analysis aimed at understanding to what extent one of the merging parties constrained the other's pricing and vice versa. So the real question we have to answer is, are they close competitors and how close? Again, the empirical model, so the underground model that we used was this one. So the standard LA AIDS framework. Only at the third level of the Haussmann approach, the 2004 and the famous paper concerning the beer industry. We have a simplified task because we had to deal only with 4 brands of canned meat. So the problem of the possible restrictive patterns critique was quite easily solved. And controls that we did controls which included for stockpiling due to price and non-price promotions. And there was a full set of monthly and year dummies to control for seasonality as well as other shocks. Seasonality in this particular market is quite important because the product is mainly consumed during summer. I mean, as a part of salad, I mean, taste is everybody has his own taste, but I mean, you add canned meat with salad and tomatoes and you eat it on the seaside. And this is the reason why during summer the consumption of canned meat increases dramatically. I have also a problem. Are these kind of consumer worth to be protected? But I mean, it's a problem that, I mean, I shouldn't. Anyway. So the data, so the model, as I said, was estimated on the base of monthly data. Standard canned meat is the 93% of the total meat consumed, sold through supermarkets, and 73% is standard meat. So the focus was on actual average prices as opposed to list prices, because as probably you know better than I know, in the supermarket chains there is the special pricing where the list prices have a very low informative content. There is the so-called triple net. The prices is net 3 times in order to achieve the real price. But I mean, moving to the estimation results, you can see this table where there are serial correlation tests in order to look at the exercises we did before reaching the key elasticities and the diversion ratios. And in this case, the diversion ratios were quite significant. The diversion ratio from Simmenthal to Manzotin was about 33%, and from Manzotin to Simmenthal was about 60%. Again, we also estimated the IPR using the formula that is illustrated in the slide. The formula was the formula for asymmetric diversion ratios contained in Hausmann 2011. The marginal cost recovered from information in the market, and they were relatively stable, and they were recovered during the proceeding and also from observed price. I mean, one of the slides, the last slides provided by Thibault Verger, provided the practical solution to this issue, the issue concerning the pass-through, because we had to deal with it. But, I mean, we could deal with it quite easily because the data, I mean, we had to use the data at the final consumer level, but they could be used also at the retail level because of the relatively stable and constant margins. So we didn't need the more heroic assumption of the, let's say, competitive structure of the downstream market. So we could manage with the pass-through in a relatively easy way without committing, let's say, a too big violence. And finally, the results in terms of prices. So the results of terms of prices, I mean, you can see the GAPI, the IPR, and the average market price increase. I mean, the results were quite sound because we had at least 3 scenarios, I mean, depending on different producers' margin. The margins were, I mean, hypothesized, but also, I mean, they were extremely realistic if compared with some of the margins that we actually knew from the players of the market. So the margins were, I mean, between 20 and 30%, and somehow even higher. So our hypotheses were extremely conservative. I mean, using these hypotheses, the average market price increase achieved something between 6 and 9%. Again, we didn't take into consideration the feedback effects of the other players. So the conclusion of the case was that merger was conditionally approved, making binding the commitments proposed by the parties. So the Italian Competition Authority can impose remedies, but I mean, usually the remedies are at the first stage proposed by the parties, and we just impose what they propose. It's a strange dance, but I mean, it works. And the remedy was to sell to an upfront buyer solution, commitment to suspend the implementation and the closing of the proposed merger. So, and I mean, it was quite a successful story because, I mean, the process, the upfront buyer is a reliable buyer, is Asdomar, which is a very successful player in the canned food sector, and it has been the buyer. So moving to the conclusion, so I would say that the merger, the example I used provides a quite simple example of how, at least on a practical ground, although in principle it is possible to deal with the main problems which the economic analysis raised in this case. The case was quite clear-cut. Most of the problems which generally arise with the use of the so-called new tools could easily be solved. We could save the new tools for phase 2. I would say that it was a forced saving because, I mean, again, I have to stress that we have just 30 days in phase 1, so it's better to save. And we can do too much sophistication in this first phase. But anyway, we could save our efforts for phase 2 because market share were so high that do not require anything else to screen the merger. We could solve also the restrictive patterns critique because there were just few and differentiated brands. We had not to deal with the design of nests of the dimensionality issues. So the merging parties were evidently close competitors. As I showed before, the diversion ratios were self-evident and well above standard threshold. We had even no choice, so we had no problems in selecting the demand form because the asymmetric IPR formulas are only available for linear demand, so we had to choose linear demand. And I mean, the results, IPRs were quite high, between 6 and 9% at the market level, and between 14, 21% for the Manzotin, the other brand. Again, a quite high range, but I mean, in this case, I mean, as the examples of the water and the bottle provided by Joseph Farrell, I mean, in that case, we're not so interested in estimating how much, but I mean, the direction and it was quite evident. And even the remedy seems to be proportionate, appropriate, and we hope effective. So, I mean, I don't want to repeat what before me and better than me somebody else said, but I mean, our experiences with the new tools, I mean, strike a good balance in the assessment of merger with differentiated products. In these cases, the relevant market approach may be misleading. I mean, but don't forget, I mean, we stressed it that the new tools require almost the same ingredients used for proper market definition. New tools are best used as a complement to traditional analysis, so market shares, brand loyalty, relative weakness of private labels. In this case, I forgot to stress it. In this specific market, the canned meat market, private labels didn't play an important role, possibly because of the specificity of the good, and countervailing power still play important role in the assessment. So lower threshold can be used in phase 1 to screen mergers that should go to phase 2, because there is a higher probability of type 2 error, but that can be further assessed and dealt with in phase 2, as in the Bolton International Luis Calvo Sanz, the one concerning the canned tuna. So in that case, we did exactly this exercise. So again, the use of UPP, GAPI, and diversion ratios are the typical question, just to screen mergers or can be used to measure unilateral effects. I mean, again, I have to stress, in the Italian case, to stress even more strongly that time matters. So, I mean, using them as screen mergers in phase 1 is not so easy, and as even the British experiences show, I mean, in phase 1, traditional tools are still largely used. It's not immediate how to deal with the so-called gray area, I mean, concerning the different results and the wide range of results that we have to deal with, arising from different functional forms of demand and thresholds. I can show the next slides that I imported from a OFT's exercise. I mean, the gray area is the one between the orange and the green one. In our case, the canned meat one, the problem didn't arise because, I mean, the position of the merging of the results was on the right side, well above the orange curve. And again, I mean, we are aware of the fallacies of UPP and IPRs. They ignore feedback effects. I mean, the fallacies have been illustrated in the previous presentation. And price pressure indicator, if we compare price pressure indicators with merger simulation, we can say that full-fledged simulation seems the most comprehensive approach, can deal with different functional form, efficiency, product repositioning, feedback effects with no merging parties, and so on. But again, it is very time-consuming. The results are often not robust and can be easily challenged. And again, I would like to stress the last bullet, they are more difficult to play in court, because as Chris said, new tools may be too easy for economists, but are still new and sometimes too complicated for judges. So let me conclude just with a personal proposal, at least to the Italian antitrust community. Why not begin to think to adjust the notification form to the new tools, to the new world, and without excessive burden for the firms, at least begin to include some of the ingredients which are necessary for the estimation of a simple UPP. It could allow the use of the new tools also in phase one, and a use which is, from my point of view, more consistent with the nature of screening devices and a more appropriate use of these old new tools. Thank you.